Beyond our memory, but within our knowledge, a vibrant Jewish community once lived and worshipped in cities and in small towns in Poland and Russia. This map indicates an area of Poland and Ukraine which 150 years ago was home to most of the estimated 5 million Jews living at that time in Eastern Europe. From 1850 to 1930, close to 2 million Jews emigrated from this area, most to America. Descendants of these immigrants, interested in what remains of their heritage, are starting to return. In July 1992, this small group arrived in Warsaw, Poland, to begin a 10-day visit to towns of family origin, to synagogues and cemeteries, and to search for family records in the state and local archives of Poland and Ukraine. Some had spent years of research in their hometown libraries, courthouses, and even in the files of the Family History Library of the Mormon Church. Others wanted to revisit their place of birth or the place from which they had escaped death in the Holocaust. Some just wanted to say a prayer at the graves of family members. For each, it was to be a time to gather memories together. Entering the 200-year-old Jewish cemetery in Warsaw, they walked past tombstones which had survived the destruction of the nearby ghetto 50 years earlier. Some stones have carved symbols. Here, 2 hands in the spread finger indication of a priestly blessing. The symbol for a charitable man. Candlesticks mark a woman's domestic piety. Books indicate a learned man. Smaller stones have been placed by visitors in the Jewish tradition of joining past with present. 75 years ago, Warsaw had a Jewish population of 350,000, 1/3 of the city's total. It was considered one of the most important Jewish centers in Europe. During the last war, virtually all were killed. While the old town center has been reconstructed, less than 10,000 Jews now live in the city. On the site of the Great Synagogue, which had been dynamited by the Germans in 1943, we find a new office building, and in its reflection, the Jewish Historical Institute and Museum. Here are records of Holocaust survivors who, returning to Warsaw or passing through it upon the war's end, registered at the Institute, hoping that they would be found by other surviving family members or friends.
Now this is great. I'm sure people who are finding the names of their relatives who they didn't know survived. To them it's probably a very, very significant event.
This synagogue is the spiritual center for a small number of the city's Jewish population. Close to 100 years old, it was severely damaged during the war. Restored 10 years ago by a private Jewish foundation, it remains little more than a symbol of the past. Housed in a former palace in Warsaw, the Polish State Archives contain basic records of birth, marriage, death, property, and military service. In one of the Warsaw City Archives, Mr. Kazimierz Kotlarski, its director, explains his program.
In our archive, we have documents, marriage, death, and birth records from Warsaw, central Warsaw region, but also from territories that used to be Polish territories and now they are in Ukraine.
A short distance north of Warsaw is the small city of Brock. Unable to find archival records of her family, which had lived in the town before the war, Rose searches for the house she remembers from her childhood.
I think that was it. It's all abandoned. I think that was it. What a day. In a way, I'm glad that nobody has it. Because if I came and somebody else was flourishing, I'd kind of be angry. But in another sense, it's as dead as they are. I think I'm the only one living that came out of this milieu. The others have all been killed. I really wanted to get in touch with my own feelings. I know that they're dead and they're gone, but something in me was seeking something, some closure, some finality, some just giving up. This is where I was loved and loved. And that's why I can't let it go. If they're dead, where are they? I'd like to pay my respects. I'd like it to be like a memorial. But I really, it upset me because I just couldn't find where they were.
For Rose and for many others whose relatives were among the 750,000 Jews who perished in the nearby Treblinka killing center, there are only rough granite stones. Brock stands among thousands of stones which identify the towns and cities in this part of Poland where Jewish life no longer exists. Next to be visited was the city of Lublin, 100 miles southeast of Warsaw. Before the Second World War, the city had been a major center of Jewish religious study. This building, once a large yeshiva or Bible study center, now houses the Lublin University Medical Academy. A plaque commemorates its Jewish origin. Another marker at the base of the Lublin Castle indicates the site of the Maharshal Synagogue, built in the 16th century, destroyed by the Germans in 1942. Among the picturesque, curving streets of this city are some isolated reminders of its Jewish past. This building contains the one remaining but unused synagogue in a city with only a few elderly Jews. Despite the ravages of time and war, some very old gravestones remain in Lublin's 400-year-old Jewish cemetery. The oldest, dating back to 1541, is that of the biblical scholar Jacob Koppelman. Another scholar, Shalom Sachna, who died in 1558, is buried here. Perhaps the most frequently visited stone is that of Rabbi Jacob Isaac Hahazoa, known as the Seer of Lublin, who died here in 1815. Completing the history of the destruction of Lublin's Jewish community is the Majdanek Killing Center, constructed by the German military just 2 miles from the city center. Here the Nazis murdered over 350,000 people, Poles, Russians, and more than 100,000 Jews, among them almost the entire Lublin Jewish population. It remains a lasting witness to the Nazi policies of genocide. Flying from Warsaw, Poland to Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, brought many of the group closer to towns and cities of ancestral interest. It was toward the end of the Second World War that the Soviets had extended their western boundary to absorb this area of what had been pre-war Poland. Kiev today is an old but vital city of great attraction to tourists. Seen from the Dnieper River, its old Orthodox churches share the view with newer monuments. The waterfront of the Podolia district no longer reflects the Jewish character it had before the turn of the last century. The State Archives in Kiev proved to be an exciting place to visit. To their surprise, this first group of Jewish visitors to the archive for genealogical research was of national TV interest. Mr. Boris Vasilyevich Ivanenko, director of the archives, made his full staff and all of their resources available to the group. After his greetings, the metrical books containing registrations of birth, marriages, and deaths were brought to the group, which eagerly began their search for family names. 60 miles northeast of Kiev is the city of Chernigov, known to Rona through old family correspondence.
I would very much like to visit the archives and the ZAG's office to look for records of my family.
Я бы очень хотела побывать в архиве вашего города и в ЗАГСе.
With the assistance of the mayor and the local Jewish community, Rona's search intensified. While she walked along streets once central to Jewish life, the houses still remarkably unchanged from the outside, her search for linkage to the past was to find a dramatic conclusion.
I want to tell you how excited I am to have found you. To have found a cousin in Chernigov was something I never expected. I came looking for documents. I thought that I might find birth certificates or marriage or death certificates, but I never expected to find a cousin, so I'm very happy. These are pictures of people in the family.
Это мой отец.
This is the father of Kaya, my cousin.
Он был очень больной перед смертью, этого сфотографировали. Мы бы жили не богато, но все-таки догадались. Милая. Выбрасывает. Вот. Так, выбросили, я уехала в Одессу. 2 года там жила, приехала, и он как будто бы уже не был. Я уже не знаю.
In their visit to the Jewish cemetery in Chernigov, Rona's newly found cousin shared with her another link in their family history. Placing her stone of remembrance on the grave of her uncle, Rona closes the gap which had existed for almost 70 years between the families of 2 brothers. And for a moment, the 2 stones, as the memories of the 2 families, are as one.